treated the split as an elaborate deception. Fearful Yugoslavs knew better. They saw enemy troops mustering near their borders, and they dreaded Stalin as a ruthless monster, a man who had coldly murdered millions of his own countrymen. The Soviet leader hesitated, apparently convinced that Tito would relent under the enormous pressure.
We know now that the Czech communists went to stay with Stalin on his holiday retreat on the Black Sea and said, "Why don't you send in the army to crush Tito?" And Stalin said, "I don't want to crush Tito. Tito's basically a good man. I want Tito to recant. I want Tito at my feet, begging for forgiveness, and I will forgive him."
Stalin grossly underestimated his opponent. Tito had bargained with Hitler. He would not hesitate to negotiate with Harry Truman.
We can fulfill our obligation of service in the cause of peace only by maintaining our strength.
In early 1949, the United States and Yugoslavia reached a secret agreement. In return for American economic assistance, Tito would maintain his independence from the Soviet bloc.
An inside look at Yugoslavia, newest target of the wrath of Moscow. The eyes of the world are focused on Belgrade, its capital on the river Danube, whence Yugoslavia's Marshal Tito is now directing his own Cold War against the common foe.
In 1950, Stalin turned his sights on Korea, sponsoring an invasion of the South by communist North Korea. American analysts thought that Korea might be a diversion, a test of Western will. If the West failed to respond, the thinking went, Stalin would attack his primary target, Yugoslavia.
We sent the secret military assistance to Tito in 1950 and 51 to encourage him in the belief that if the Soviets did attack, that we would come to his assistance. The aid itself is not very substantial. One American official described it as a freighter full of some old guns, but it was psychological. It was meant to tell Tito that the West valued his survival and that the West would act if necessary.
The arms shipment sent an unmistakable message to Stalin. No longer could he invade Yugoslavia with impunity. By waiting for Tito to crumble, he had lost his chance to snatch the country. Tito had won. The alliance with the United States profoundly changed the face of Yugoslavia. By the mid-1950s, Tito was opening his closed society to Western journalists.
He was very good at cultivating the Western press. We even had sort of very informal dinners with him on his island, for example. We could just get in and wait for him in his residence. You know, sit down at his piano and play music. He would come, and he was quite a charming host.
Westerners were surprised to find a communist leader who openly enjoyed life. Whether hunting, fishing, or riding horses, his vigorous style was reminiscent of Teddy Roosevelt. And his effect on women was unmistakable. In 1951, he married his fourth and final wife, Jovanka, a faithful comrade from the partisan days.
A great many women in Yugoslavia were very upset when he actually got married to Jovanka, and there was tremendous jealousy, especially in the Communist Party. All the wives of the communist officials were terribly jealous.
Confident in his authority, Tito began to liberalize Yugoslavia, ending terror as a means of political repression.
Tito is quoted as saying, "Enough of the killing. We've done enough of that. We must stop it." And you began to see in Yugoslavia, say 5 to 10 years after the war was over, a different kind of approach.
The new path led to a brand of socialism known as Titoism. While the state maintained ownership of major industries, local workers were encouraged to manage their own fields or factories, and even allowed to own some private property. Trade with the West brought even greater prosperity. And as a key crossroads in the Cold War, Yugoslavia was showered with foreign aid. Once Stalin died in 1953, everyone wanted Tito's friendship.
In 1956, Khrushchev came to Belgrade to ask Tito's forgiveness. Stalin had been dead for 3 years and was now considered a despot, even in the Soviet camp. For Marshal Tito, a lifelong communist and fierce nationalist, it was a moment of supreme vindication. He remained the undisputed leader of his country and gained the distinction of having altered the history of world communism.
By maintaining close, but not too close relations with East and West, he received the benefits of an ally with no strings attached.
Tito was a superb manipulator. He was able to balance the two most powerful countries in the world. His own country is really relatively small and insignificant, but because of the Cold War, it assumed a great deal of importance, and Tito was very, very skilled at keeping both the Soviets and the Americans at arm's length.
For the rest of his life, Tito would play both sides against the other, commanding the attention and respect of the world's two great superpowers. But not even he could conquer the growing divisions within his own country. In 1960, Tito turned 68 years old and increasingly took on the role of elder statesman. With his position at home secure, he began organizing independent nations from around the globe.
Once Yugoslavia